They said I wasn't on the list. Not angrily, not loudly, just calmly, as if it were a fact, a minor clerical matter, like my name had never belonged on any list to begin with, as if it had been a favor to include me, and now that favor had expired. I remember standing in line outside the glass doors of the courthouse, coat buttoned high, boots stiff from cold storage, fingers gloved but trembling. I had flown overnight from D.C. No sleep, no greeting, just a sharp breath of air, dry from Nevada wind, and the sight of my parents laughing with my brother at the top of the courthouse steps. They didn't see me at first. Or maybe they did. It's hard to tell with people who've trained themselves not to look. I adjusted my lapel, straightened the crease in my trousers. Military habit. Can't help it. Every thread was regulation sharp, every button gleaming even though I was off duty. Not here as a commander, not here as intelligence, just a daughter, a sister, a name on a list that someone had quietly removed. I walked toward them anyway. My father turned first. I know that look, the quick assessment, the tight jaw. Not angry, just uncomfortable, like someone being asked to explain something they don't want to admit. His hand twitched at his side. He didn't raise it. My mother was worse. She smiled. "Oh, you came." No hug, no warmth, just the tiniest tilt of her head, as if I'd shown up to a place I wasn't supposed to be. I wanted to believe it was nerves, formality, discomfort with public affection. But I knew better. "Where should I sit?" I asked. She blinked, glanced at the folder in her hand, the one with the seating chart. "You're not on the list," she said. And there it was again, that phrase, as if I was asking too much, as if I had inserted myself, as if my whole identity, my 20 years of service, my clearance, my operations, my blood was some social inconvenience they'd rather ignore. My brother didn't say anything. He looked down at his shoes, the ones I paid for when he didn't get the internship and needed work gear. I don't think he meant to be cruel. He just didn't want to get in the way. "Don't worry," I said, swallowing the heat in my throat. "I'll stand." They didn't argue. I could feel it, that strange vacuum that forms when your presence unsettles the wrong people. That sharp awareness that you're too much for the space they've prepared. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just adjusting. Like I'd walked into someone else's story mid-sentence. Do you know that feeling? When you're the one who climbed, the one who bled, the one who held secrets that would shatter countries, and still, in front of your own blood, you're treated like an afterthought. I found my way inside. Anyway, the hallway smelled of dust and disinfectant. A metal detector buzzed once and fell silent. The bailiff, an older man with tired eyes, gave me a second glance when I passed. Not because I looked suspicious, but because I looked like I didn't belong and somehow didn't care. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Rows of seats, wooden benches polished by decades of grief and guilt. My heels clicked on the tile. I stood near the back, not seated, just observing. I wasn't even sure what they were fighting over anymore. An inheritance, a property line, something about taxes, something bitter enough for lawyers to swarm like vultures, something ridiculous enough to be public. They hadn't invited me to participate. They didn't think I'd come. But the funny thing about military women, we don't wait for permission. We assess. We adapt. We enter the theater, even when it's hostile. You'd think, after years of holding briefings that made grown men sweat, I'd be immune to this kind of sting, but nothing hits like family erasure. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Disguises itself as oversight, formality, protocol, and yet, you feel it like a blade under your collarbone. My father took the stand first. Calm, controlled. His voice had always been persuasive. I used to admire that. He knew how to shift tone like a conductor, play the victim, then the authority, then the wise patriarch. But as he spoke, I watched the judge's face flat, unreadable. And my mother, she sat behind him, fingers laced tightly, eyes darting every time a name was mentioned. Every name but mine. Do you know what it's like to hear your own bloodline recited and feel like a ghost in the room? When they talked about my brother's work, something with finance, I think there were nods of pride. When they mentioned my cousin's small business, my mother beamed. But when my name was accidentally said by an attorney, reading from a dated will, there was a pause. She's no longer involved, my mother said. Just like that, I'm no longer involved. As if I were a contract, a decommissioned file, something once useful but now archived, deleted. I didn't flinch. I'd had worse said about me by foreign operatives with blood on their hands. I'd had bullets skim my skull and explosives nearly blind me. I'd watched men fold under interrogation while I stood still. But nothing prepared me for the quiet venom of a parent's dismissal in open court. She hasn't lived here in years, my mother added. She's not familiar with the property. Property? Is that what I was now? I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain, not grief, just precision. Something clicked, that inner calibration I'd honed over decades. The shift from emotion to strategy. I stepped forward, and this time, the judge noticed. So did the attorneys. And my father, his face changed when he saw me rise from the shadows. The way I stood, the way my shoulders aligned. Military instinct. "Excuse me," I said, voice steady. "I have documents to submit." The room went still. Even my mother blinked. My brother looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. No one had expected me to speak, let alone participate, let alone bring evidence. But I wasn't here to be expected. I was here to be undeniable. And as I walked toward the bench papers in hand, clearance code printed in the corner, legal verification of the trust's real beneficiary, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt alive. The silence around me wasn't rejection now. It was recognition. My hand didn't shake as I passed the folder to the court clerk. Every movement was clean, exact. Years of intelligence work had trained me for this presentation under pressure. Truth embedded in procedure. The documents bore my name, my rank, and the clear, time-stamped record of everything my parents tried to suppress. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The weight of the binder said it all, behind me. I could feel their discomfort settling like ash, the whisper of old lies choking on oxygen. My mother shifted in her seat. My father leaned slightly forward, like he hadn't heard right, but he had. Every word on those pages echoed through his silence like a detonated secret. The judge skimmed the front page, then the next. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in surprise. "Colonel," he said, without looking up. "Not miss, not ma'am. Colonel." I nodded once. "Yes, sir." That was when the room changed. That one word rippled like thunder through dry leaves. Even people who didn't know protocol, who didn't understand what that rank meant, felt the shift. Because suddenly, I wasn't a forgotten daughter standing awkwardly in the back. I wasn't an outsider to be quietly ignored. I was someone who could turn silence into command. Do you know what it's like to be called by your true name in front of the people who erased you? It's not vindication, it's revelation. The courtroom doors groaned open behind me. I didn't turn, but I recognized the rhythm before I heard it, the syncopated sound of polished boots striking tile. 3 of them. No, 4. Black suits, crisp lines, silver clasps at the wrist, military legal observers. They weren't part of the court. They were part of my world, sent not to intimidate, but to verify. I had told no one they would come, but they came anyway, because sometimes power doesn't shout. It arrives. My mother exhaled sharply. My father cleared his throat. Still, I didn't look at them. Let them feel the slow burn of consequence. Let them sit in the fire of their own doubt. I had given them years to recognize me. They chose to pretend I'd disappeared. Now the silence was theirs to manage. The judge turned a few more pages. These documents validate a military trust, he said carefully, established after active service and authorized under federal protections. He paused, looked at my parents. Why was this not disclosed earlier? My father said nothing. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. There it was, that tiny crack in the porcelain of their performance, that slip where decorum becomes panic. I had seen warlords lose control like that. Not when the bullets start flying, but when the mask slips, when the power they thought they held turns to smoke. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I stood straight, chin high, like I was in the war room, because I was Colonel, the judge repeated, now looking directly at me. Do you intend to contest the claim? I don't need to, I said quietly. The documents speak. And they did. The courtroom read them in silence. Not aloud, not theatrically, just thoroughly. There were signatures from officials, scanned orders from classified missions declassified just enough to confirm location. Dates that corresponded with months I'd been reported MIA when my parents were sending Christmas cards to neighbors that didn't mention me at all. That was the worst of it. You know, not the danger, not the exile, but the letters I read later, the ones where they wrote to relatives as if I didn't exist. She travels a lot, they said. She's doing something, I think. We don't really hear from her anymore, as if I hadn't written. As if I hadn't called from bases when I could. As if I hadn't shown up at Aunt May's funeral in full uniform and stood beside them silently, like a ghost in polished leather. But ghosts remember, and sometimes they rise in broad daylight, in courtrooms, with metals in their past and fire in their lungs. One of the military observers stepped forward and handed the judge a secondary document, something I didn't even know they'd bring. Sir, he said, authorization for operational commendation under Section 12 Delta, awarded 2 years ago under codenamed Operation. The colonel was primary architect of the initiative, resulted in national-level recognition and trust authorization. I froze. I hadn't expected them to go that far. Even the judge leaned back. My parents were still, my brother, seated a few rows behind them now, leaned slightly forward. And that was the moment I saw it. Not guilt, not apology, but fear. Because they realized I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the storm. Do you understand what that means? To be dismissed by your family for so long, only to become the one person whose name the government knows by necessity. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels irreversible. When the recess bell rang, I stepped outside. Not because I was tired, but because I needed the sky, the open space, the clarity. My boots hit the pavement like punctuation marks, each step measured, breathing steady. And there he was, my father, catching up, out of breath but pretending it was casual. You didn't tell us, he said. Tell you? I wrote you 5 times. I said, not turning. You responded once. He looked away. We thought you were involved in something secret. I was, and we respected that. I turned then. No, I said, voice cold. You forgot that. He tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Well, it's good to see you. Really, you look strong. That's when I said it. I command 6,000 men. His mouth opened slightly, like he was about to congratulate me, but the words didn't come. Because what do you say when your daughter, the one you erased, turns out to outrank the version of you that still lives in your head? You stay quiet, and you start listening. My father didn't follow me back into the courtroom. I didn't need him to. I didn't come for reconciliation. I didn't wear this uniform for applause. I came because truth, unlike family, doesn't forget your name. The military observers stayed in the back, silent, still, like shadows bearing witness. One of them was a woman I knew from a black site op in Jordan. We had once dug a listening device out of a concrete wall with nothing but a spoon and a map of Tehran. She nodded at me when our eyes met. Not a greeting, a recognition. My mother hadn't moved. She was still seated near the front, rigid as marble. Her fingers, usually so poised, now clenched her handbag in silence. That bag, I remembered it from my childhood. Worn leather, a gold clasp. She used to keep peppermint inside for church. Now she clung to it like it could anchor her to some version of reality that was slipping fast. The judge resumed his seat. His voice came low, careful, professional. In light of the new documentation submitted and verified, the court will need to reevaluate the claims previously accepted regarding the family estate. My parents didn't speak. I saw the attorney lean toward them, whispering fast. Something about adjustments, something about timelines, but none of it mattered. Not now, because their version of the story had cracked, and no legal brief could glue it back. There was a moment, quiet but sharp, when my mother turned her head just slightly and looked at me. I held her gaze. She didn't look away, but she didn't smile either. And I realized, in that moment, we weren't mother and daughter anymore. We were witnesses to two different versions of the same history, and only one of us had brought evidence. The judge spoke again. "Colonel, do you wish to make a statement?" I stood slowly, adjusted the cuffs of my sleeve. I wasn't wearing medals, not today, but my insignia was visible. The one that had earned me stares in airports, respect in bunkers, and mockery in family group chats I hadn't been added to in 5 years. "No statement," I said. "Just truth." He nodded. And that was it. Do you know how strange it feels when justice doesn't come like thunder but like breath? Not a roar, a recognition. The kind that slips under your skin and makes you whole again, not because anyone says sorry, but because the silence has finally shifted in your direction. I walked out alone. The hallway was still empty. Desert light filtered in through narrow windows, making everything feel older. Dust floated like ghosts in golden shafts. I stopped near the vending machine, pressed my hand against the cold glass. I didn't need a drink. I needed a minute. And then I heard it, the voice I didn't expect. My brother. "Hey." I turned. He wasn't in a suit like the others. Just a button-down and those same boots from 5 years ago, scuffed at the toe. His hair was longer. He looked older, but not stronger. "I didn't know," he said. "You didn't ask." He flinched. "I didn't think you'd even show." "No one did," I said. He looked at me for a long time. "I used to tell people you were in Washington," he said, "working in some office." I didn't know what else to say. "You could have told them I was alive." He looked down. "I'm sorry." There it was. Small, human, belated, but real. And the strange thing is, I didn't hate him. Because brothers don't always betray with knives. Sometimes they betray with silence, with the choice not to defend you at the table, with the convenience of pretending you're distant, instead of saying she's saving lives, and I'm not even sure where. He glanced toward the courtroom. "They're going to spin this, you know. I don't care. They'll say you ambushed them. I brought evidence." He nodded. Then, softly, "You were always different." That made me laugh, bitter and short. "You say that like it's a curse." "I don't think it is anymore." He paused, then added, "What's it like being called Colonel?" I looked at him, and something softened in me. Maybe because he asked. Maybe because he meant it. "It's not about the name," I said. "It's about who says it." He nodded again, slower this time. I wish I'd said it sooner. I didn't answer. Some things aren't owed. Some wounds close without a sound. Not because they're healed, but because you've learned to live above them. Outside, the wind had picked up. My ride was waiting. Not a limo, not a black SUV, just a government sedan with tinted glass and a quiet driver who knew better than to ask questions. I stepped toward it. My brother didn't follow. I didn't turn back. Because you can forgive someone and still know they don't belong in your next chapter. Do you understand that forgiveness is not an invitation? It's a closure. I slid into the back seat, and as the door shut behind me, I exhaled for the first time all day. Not relief, not pride, just release. The car pulled away, slow and silent. And behind me, in that courthouse, the people who had once edited me out of the story now had to live inside one I'd rewritten with proof, with rank, with silence that spoke louder than their words ever could. The drive was long, quiet, the kind of quiet I used to crave when I was deployed. No comms, no chatter, just asphalt unfolding under rubber, and the faint hum of something that could be mistaken for peace. But it wasn't peace. It was something colder. The kind of stillness you feel when you've finally stopped asking for a seat at the table, when you've realized the table was never yours to begin with, and you were never meant to be fed, only forgotten. I stared out the window, watching the dry Nevada fields blur past. Dust clung to old fence posts. Sagebrush curled at the edges of the earth. The landscape here always felt like my family scorched, brittle, pretending nothing ever needed to grow. The driver didn't speak. Military transport, probably briefed, probably told who I was, but not why I'd come. Good. Let the silence do its work. I leaned my head back. Let it all play again. The courtroom. The way my mother didn't flinch when she said I wasn't on the list. Like she'd practiced the line. Like it gave her power. The way my father's throat tightened when the judge called me colonel. The way my brother asked, too late, what it felt like to be acknowledged. You know that sound in your mind, when something falls into place and the click echoes longer than it should. That's what it felt like when the judge said my rank out loud. It wasn't pride. It was confirmation that I had existed, even if they had acted like I didn't. I used to think the greatest revenge was being proven right, that one day they'd have to admit I mattered. But I was wrong. The real power isn't being proven right. It's not needing them to admit it at all. The car stopped at a checkpoint. A pair of guards stepped forward. One looked at me through the window, paused, then saluted before I'd even unrolled the glass. I nodded once. That was all. Recognition, without explanation. It's a language only earned in places where maps don't work. The gate opened. We passed through. And there it was, the base. Not my main station, just a satellite facility. But it still had the smell steel, sand, order. The sharp cut of protocols moving through air like wind through wire. I stepped out, adjusted my coat. The sun was sinking behind the watchtower, long shadows bleeding across concrete. A familiar rhythm settled into my spine, footsteps in cadence, badges scanning, coded greetings exchanged with nothing more than a glance. I belonged here, not because they said so, because I had bled for it. Inside the operations wing, I nodded at a few officers, passed the secure doors, and entered my temporary quarters. Spartan, clean. One photo frame on the desk. Turned down. I hadn't unpacked it in months. I don't carry family pictures anymore. Not since Kabul. Not since the day I found out my father told the neighbor I worked somewhere in admin. I unzipped the side of my duffel, pulled out the sealed envelope the observers had handed me at the courthouse. Inside was a copy of the court order, amended estate designations, signed affidavits, and at the back, stapled, barely hanging on a single page of acknowledgement, my full name, rank, operational designation, primary authority. That's all it said. No apology, no fanfare, but it was mine. I slid the paper into the desk drawer, locked it, didn't look at it again. Then I stood there, staring at my own reflection in the blackout window, lit only by the red indicator from the security panel. I looked taller than I felt, harder than I remembered. The lines around my mouth had deepened. The eyes, they'd stopped asking to be seen. I wasn't the same woman they raised. Maybe that's why they let me go so easily. Do you know what it's like to change so much? Your family doesn't recognize you anymore, not because of age, because of power. Because you learned how to live without their approval, and somehow, that made you dangerous. I used to call home on holidays. I'd wait through long rings, sometimes voicemail, sometimes short conversations about weather and recipes and people I no longer remembered. Then, one year, I stopped, and no one noticed. Or maybe they did, and didn't say anything. Which is worse. The driver knocked once. "Ma'am, briefing in 20. I nodded. Copy. I slipped out of the coat, hung it on the hook, changed into the dark uniform. Not the one for court. This one was for command. My name, stitched across the chest. No embellishments. Just truth. My boots hit the floor with familiar weight, and as I walked back down the hallway, I realized something. They couldn't take it from me. Not the court. Not my parents. Not anyone. Because the thing they feared, the thing they couldn't name, wasn't that I had left them. It was that I had built a world without them. And now, that world had walked into theirs and stood taller. No shouting, no revenge. Just presence. Just proof. And for people who've spent their lives pretending you don't exist, there is no punishment greater than being forced to watch you command the silence they once used to erase you. I walked into the briefing room. 4 officers stood when I entered. They didn't know my past, only my rank. And that was enough. The room was quiet, but charged. I could feel the undercurrent the moment I stepped in, the kind of still electricity that settles into men who know they're about to be led. Not by force, not by noise, but by someone whose presence changes the gravity of the room. They didn't know what had happened in that courtroom. They didn't know what it meant to watch your mother erase you with a breath, or what it cost to hand a sealed document across a line that used to be blood. All they saw was the insignia on my chest, and the way I didn't hesitate. "Colonel," one of them said, voice crisp, at ease. Chairs scraped gently, no fidgeting, no small talk. Good. The screen blinked to life as I laid the folder down. Satellite images, coordinates, supply routes, high-risk zone patterns. Not glamorous, not headline work, but the kind of precision that saves people before anyone knows they were in danger. I spoke for 20 minutes, laid out the new movement plan, adjusted the tactical window, assigned sectors, and pointed out weaknesses. Every word landed. No one interrupted. Not because I was intimidating, but because I was undeniable. That's the difference people don't talk about. Men in power are expected. Women in power are noticed. And women who carry power quietly, who don't flinch, who don't soften, who don't explain. They are remembered. After the briefing, one of the younger officers lingered. Mid-20s. Sharp jaw. Bright eyes that flicked too fast. "Permission to speak, ma'am." "Go." "I've read your name in the hall files," he said. "Didn't realize it was you." "What did you read?" He hesitated. "Said you coordinated 600 ops in 2 years, that you got flagged by Central Intelligence for black tier strategy. But they shut the file." I gave a half smile. "That's because it worked." He grinned. "They said you're the one who cracked Phantom Valley." "I didn't crack it. I listened longer than the others did." That made him pause. His face changed from admiration to something deeper. Reverence. Maybe. He nodded once, almost like a salute, then left. I stood in the room alone. The screen dimmed. The silence returned. But it was a different silence now. Not the kind I grew up with, the kind you fill with overachieving, hoping someone will notice you exist. This was earned silence. Chosen. And it made me think, what makes a family turn on their own? Is it fear? Is it shame? Or is it the unbearable truth that the person they look down on now has a power they cannot understand? You see, it's not just that I became something they didn't expect. It's that I became something they couldn't control. And for people like my parents, control was always the currency of love. Once I stopped needing it, I stopped being theirs. That night, I walked out onto the base runway. Desert air, Cold steel lights humming above, drones in the distance, the sound of a jet prepping for night flight. I stood there, watching the wind flatten the sand like it was erasing yesterday. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who sent postcards home that were never pinned to the fridge. The one who sat through family dinners while everyone asked my brother about his startup and forgot I had just returned from Baghdad. The one who won an internal citation for neutralizing a chemical breach, only to hear her father say, "Don't you ever want to just settle down?" I breathed deep. Let it all go. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about saying it's okay. It's about finally choosing to stop carrying what they dropped. Let them live with the versions of me they prefer: silent, absent, imagined. I know who I am. Colonel, commander, daughter of silence, mother of order, ghost in their history, storm in their courtroom. And if you've ever felt the sting of being cut from your own family's story, let me tell you something. There comes a day when the boots that echo through the halls will not be theirs. They'll be yours, and they won't know whether to stand or run. I flew back east the next morning. No ceremony, no send-off. Just the quiet shuffle of flight protocol and my orders folded neatly into the inside pocket of my coat. As we lifted off, I watched the desert fall away beneath the clouds, pale and cracked like an old memory. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel healed. I felt clean, like the burn had finally cauterized. 2 hours into the flight, I checked my phone. One missed call from my brother, no voicemail, and one text. "They're saying you embarrassed them. Mom's crying." That was all. No apology, no context, just a report. As if I were still part of the system. As if I owed them reaction, clarification, comfort. I didn't reply. Let them sit in their discomfort. Let them feel, for once, the sharp edge of being misunderstood, of being left unread. Because for years, I carried their shame like a mission pack strapped tight to my spine, weighing down every move, the guilt of being too different, too ambitious, too invisible. But now they could carry their own weight, and I would carry mine with purpose, with command, and with no need for translation. When I landed, a junior intelligence officer met me at the gate, clipboard, tablet, encrypted brief in hand. "Welcome back, Colonel," she said. She was young, eager, her uniform just a little too stiff. Her eyes scanned me like I was more story than woman. "Thank you, Lieutenant," I said. She hesitated. Then permission to ask a personal question. I raised an eyebrow. "Granted. Is it true they left you off the list?" So the story had traveled. Of course it had. In our circles, stories spread faster than secrets, especially the ones soaked in betrayal. I didn't answer right away, just adjusted my cuffs and looked her in the eye. "It's true," I said, "but I wasn't there to be on their list." She waited, wide-eyed. I brought my own. She smiled, the kind of smile that says thank you for surviving what they did to you. The kind of smile women give each other in war zones and conference rooms. We walked side by side to the command building. Inside, the lights were different, cooler, blue-toned. The air was sterile with a hint of static. Screens blinked with intelligence feeds. Keypads buzzed softly under fingers. Every step I took echoed with purpose, not just in the room, but in me. And then I heard it just before entering the debrief chamber. My name. Not my code, not my call sign. My name. Spoken from the mouth of the Secretary of Defense. "Colonel Nguyen." I turned. He stood at the far end of the room, surrounded by aides. They parted when he looked at me. I read the transcripts. He said, "They underestimated you." "They always did, sir." He paused. "You handled it with precision." I nodded. It was never about them. He studied me for a moment, then stepped closer and held out a small black box. "Not for what happened, for what you've done, quietly, for years." I opened it. Not a medal, a clasp, A pin given only to those who've led silent missions with no public record operations that shift tectonic plates without ever touching the surface. I had 3 already. This was my 4th. He didn't need to say anything else. Just nodded. Once. And turned back to his people. And I stood there, the daughter they tried to erase, now wearing a symbol no civilian could name, but every soldier respected. Sometimes people ask what justice feels like. It doesn't roar, it doesn't weep. It walks into the room and makes every eye turn without asking. That night, I sat alone in my quarters, staring out over the city. Below me, the lights glittered like signal flares in the dark. Somewhere, my parents were still spinning their story about how I had been difficult, how I had embarrassed the family, how I had changed. And they're right. I had changed. I stopped needing their approval like oxygen. I stopped begging for a seat at their table. I built my own table. And now the people who had once looked through me were reading my name in reports marked eyes only. I don't hate them. I don't even pity them. I just see them clearly now. Like old photographs you finally understand not because they changed, but because you stopped trying to be in them. And maybe one day, they'll understand who I became. But I won't wait. I have too many missions left. Too many daughters like me watching from the edges of their families, wondering if they'll ever be enough. To them, I say this. You don't need to be on their list. You were never meant to fit their frame. You are not a footnote. You are the whole damn report. Let them forget. Let them pretend. But when the silence shifts and the room stands at attention, walk in, boots first. And never explain. I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.